It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. I always say every week that I'm far from being the greatest radio talk show host, but I am very proud of the fact that I get some of the best people to call in, both our people who call in on the show, but also the guests that we have on. We've had on already. We had Governor Doug Burgum of North Dakota. We had Art Laffer, the famous economist. We've had Hogan Gidley, who my heart goes out to him. He's stuck there in the Atlanta airport because of the incompetence of this administration. I mean, these people couldn't run a two-car parade, and they're in charge of our country. And these are the people who screwed up, by the way, the security last week when Donald Trump was so tragically shot. And so it's just a privilege to be on the air with you. I know we have an audience that is all over this country. We get people who call in all the way from Georgia, all the way up into Maine. We had people last week that called in from Seattle on the other side of the country. So it is just a real privilege. And I always say I have the smartest audience. I really believe that. I think I have the smartest audience about any other show. If you turn on any other radio station right now, you're probably just going to get, canned ads and things like that. We have live programming on Saturday afternoon. How cool is that? And so I am going to take your calls now. I think the producer said that my producer, by the way, is Christian, and Jackson Avery is also in my office here in Washington, D.C., where we record the show, but we're live today. And so that 1-800 number for the More Money hotline is 1-800-848-9222. I'd love it to hear from some Democrats. And I know I want to hear from Democrats about whether you think it's time to throw Joe Biden out. And I'm not a Democrat, so I'm not going to make that decision. But if you're a Democrat, please call in 1-800-848-9222 and tell our audience why you think they got to get rid of Joe Biden and Jill. Or why they should keep him, because that is the question of the day for the whole country. And I would like to hear your wise voices on that. In the meantime, we have a couple of people who have been waiting very patiently. And let's start, Mr. Producer Christian, with Nick from New Jersey.
Hey, Steve.
Hi, Nick.
Current growth matches the deficit, it seems like, but only a fraction of the growth is taxed. So we'll still need to
Wait. Say that again. I couldn't quite understand you. Say it again.
Current growth matches the deficit, but only a fraction of the growth is taxed.
I'm not sure what you mean by that. What do you mean?
So Art Laffer is right that you can grow your way out of the deficit.
Yes.
But only a fraction of the growth is taxed. So we just.
I see what you're saying. More. Yeah. Okay. Right. So what is your point?
So my point is that we need to do more taxing, because it seems like cutting spending is a pipe dream. Possibly taxing corporations as individuals, removing tax deductions, and maybe adding a top tax rate for above $1 million to maybe 50%. That might cover the deficit.
Okay, Nick, great call. So let me take that on. First of all, here's the problem with the way you're thinking about this. First, you are right that it's very difficult to cut government spending. I've been doing this, folks, for 40 years. I got to Washington in 1984. I worked in the budget office under Reagan. I've been trying to cut the budget. I've made hundreds and hundreds of recommendations. We could easily cut $2 trillion out of this budget in a snap, given all the waste and redundancy and inefficiency of government. But you try to close this gap with taxes, Nick, and I just think it won't work. If you raise taxes, what do you think the first thing that politicians will do? They will raise spending. Taxes cause spending. If you raise the taxes, they're just going to spend more. As Ronald Reagan said, it's like giving an alcoholic another drink. It does not work. It does not work. That's number one. Number two, taxes will hurt the economy. If you raise the tax rate, by the way, the top 1% in America, the rich people that Nick was talking about, and by the way, I appreciate his call. He knows what he's talking about. I just disagree with his conclusion because the top 1% pay right now 46.5% of the income tax. 1 out of 100 Americans pay almost half the income tax. The problem isn't that they're not paying their fair share. It's that we have a out of control budget. My friend Rand Paul, who I hope to get on the show in the next week or two, he's my favorite senator. He told me the other day that if we could just go back to the pre-COVID levels of spending in Washington, before we spent that $5 trillion, if COVID is over, we could balance the budget. It's not that hard. We got to grow the economy, and we've got to get the tax revenues up through the growth, and we've got to cut spending. There's $300 billion of a green energy slush fund. $300 billion. The first thing Donald Trump should do when he gets in office is, guess what? We're not spending that money. The great call, though, by Nick, 1-800-848-9222. I'm hoping to hear from some Democrats, 1-800-848-9222. It sounds like Nick might have been a Democrat. I didn't ask him. I think we have on next Steve from New Jersey.
Hey, Steve.
Hi.
Loyal listeners of yours since day one when you got on the air.
Thank you.
I caught the whole speech of President Trump the other night, and
yes.
it warmed what's left of my cold heart when you talked about cutting dealing with the national debt. And
yes.
Unfortunately, he didn't spend enough time, but he did gloss over by mentioning the record tax revenues that the tax cuts brought in, coupled with the tariffs,
yes.
where he had to impose tariffs. You see how he uses tariffs to balance the trade deficit, all right? But he mentioned that the revenue coming in, all right, that's how we're going to get the revenue side under control.
Yes.
It was working into 2020. Now we got to deal to dovetail onto your previous caller. You're right. We got to deal with the spending. He could have easily dealt with that in cutting regs. You reduce the size and scope of government. Your first guest, Governor Doug Burgum, he rattled off 3 agencies that you can put under the auspices of the EPA and eliminate a lot of that wasteful spending. All right, I'll stop there so you can get to more callers, but what do you think?
Okay, Steve, great call. That's why I tell you, I've got the smartest listeners in America, and Steve is an example of that, and Nick are too. Steve is exactly right. You grow the economy, you get more people working, you get people off of welfare, so guess what? They're not taking out of the government. They're actually putting money into the tax system rather than taking out tax dollars. So Steve's exactly right that. And then you just start cutting the spending. There is so much waste. I mean, Medicare and Medicaid. Trump is right. We should not cut people's benefits, but my God, people are ripping off the system. Put those people in jail, get the money back. How much money was stolen from COVID, for goodness sakes? So I could go on for another 20 minutes telling you of all the why do we have a Department of Education? Why do we have a federal Department of Education? Somebody show me how that has improved our schools. Because guess what? We've had this now, let's see, since 1978. That's 45 years or so. And the schools are worse today than they were when we created the Department of Education. The test scores are down. It hasn't helped. It's not creating smarter kids. Do we have time to squeeze in one more caller, Mr. Producer?
We have Ray from New Jersey.
Ray, thanks for calling. We got a lot of people from New Jersey today. Thanks for calling in.
Well, thanks for having me. I have a real quick question, and it's kind of self-serving, but how about an incentive for 401k holders if they take the money out to pay off their primary mortgage of their 401k that they don't get taxed? Maybe that would create some incentive and free up the help out the working man a little bit.
That's a great call. I've got to cut you off because we've only got a minute left before our break. But again, great idea. Folks, with the Dow now at 40,000, I've been an advocate for 30 years for letting people take their Social Security payroll tax money and putting that into a 401k plan. And if we had done that, when Steve Forbes and I started talking about this 30 some years ago, if you're a retiree, your average Social Security benefit is about $1,800 a month. If you would put that money into a 401k plan and index fund, you wouldn't be getting $1,800 a month. You're getting $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000 a month, and you would be able to give $1 million to your kids when you die. So let's convert Social Security voluntarily. People want to do it. Instead of paying the tax, they put it into a 401k plan, and they will have real security in their retirement. We got to take a quick break, folks. We'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. This is your host, Steve Moore, and we are live. We are live and in color today, unlike all the other stations that have recorded programs or else, infomercials. We are talking to real people. We had great guests today, and I know, Christian, that Mike from New York has been patiently waiting to come on. So let's take the call from Mike, and then I'll introduce my next guest. Mike, what do you got for us?
Hi, Steve. Congratulations on your second hour, but I think I know the reason. Your flow in your communication with your guests is uninterrupted by commercials constantly.
There you go.
All your competition.
Yes.
And in doing so, we are able to enjoy the flow you have with your guests.
Thank you.
But we learn so much more because it's not a hit-miss, start-stop thing. My question is, the president proposed cutting tips on Ubers and
cutting the tax,
and barbers and such.
Cutting the tax.
Is, will that be subject to a constitutional question from others in the workforce who don't get the break? It looks to me like, even though I have 3 tip receivers in my family, and I would appreciate that, if I'm not paying my student loan and I get forgiveness and somebody else paid it off, they think they got screwed. And it's going to look that way to workers who are not taxed. So would there be a constitutional question? And then would it survive court challenges, in your opinion? And thanks for your answer.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the kind words. And as I said, we have such smart listeners with great questions and great comments. I am not a constitutional lawyer, so I'm going to ask that question of my legal friends, but I'm just going to address the economic aspect of this, which is tip. My first job was a car parker. I was a valet. And boy, that was a fun job. I was like 17, 18 years old, and I'd get to drive these incredibly cool cars, Porsches, and, because it was at the rich country club that people would pull up in these, Rolls Royces and so on. And we got to drive those cars on. That was a lot of fun. But, we lived on tips. And, back then, gosh, shows you how old I am. Back then, if you got $1 tip, this was back in the early 80s, $1 tip was a big deal. That was when the dollar really meant something, before we had Biden inflation. I love this idea, folks. And I think, I talked to Trump about it, and I asked him where he got the idea, because he didn't get it from me. He didn't get it from Art Laffer or Larry Kudlow. He came up with that idea himself, and he said a waitress told him it would be a good policy, and boy, was he right. But I love the idea. Look, the great thing about the tip economy is you get paid for your performance. If you did a really good job, with your, like say you were washing somebody's car, or you're the chef, or you're a waitress. If I get a good waitress, I give her a big tip. I'll give a 25% tip, sometimes 30% if she or he is really good. I hate giving even 15% to a bad waiter or waitress. So the better job you do, the more money you make. I love that. And these are working class Americans, and I think they deserve a break. So I think it's a great policy. So great call, Mike. My next guest, by the way, is a good friend, Ned Manulm, and Ned is one of the leading. I wanted to bring him on right now to this show because, folks, this guy is one of the top geologists in the country. Now, why would I want to bring a geologist on a show that's about making money? And the answer is because we have trillions of dollars of minerals and energy resources in this country that we are not getting access to under the Biden policies. This is craziness. We should be using our natural resources. Ned, you are one of the top geologists in the country. You were one of the top geologists at the Interior Department. Thanks so much for joining.
Steve Moore, it's my pleasure to be with you, and always great to talk about this very important issue to our country.
Now, I bet that, thank you, Ned, and I bet that a lot of our listeners don't know a lot about this because we don't talk about it, and that's why I was so eager to bring you on, because you are an expert on this. So, first of all, let's start with this. The United States, would you agree, is incredibly endowed with natural resources and minerals in this country?
Steve, no doubt about it. Listen, I'm a hardcore scientist, okay, but yet when I look at a geologic map of our country, to me, it's almost a spiritual experience because I look at that and I say, there's no other country on this planet that has the endowment, and it's actually called a mineral endowment, like the United States. Unfortunately, Steve, a third or more of that endowment is on federal lands, and we can't get to it under this administration.
Why?
Well, look, they don't want mining to proceed because of whatever reason.
Why? I feel like I'm pulling my hair out. I don't understand the logic of this, because when I got together, you and I had lunch a week or two ago. This is the smartest guy, folks, on what's going on with mineral resources. And you were saying because we're not mining for it, we have to get these precious minerals from, China, some countries I've never even heard of before that are not friendly to the United States, Russia and other countries that are enemies to the United States. Why in the world aren't we using our own resources?
All right, let me give you a 20-second synopsis. Starting back in the 70s, we had the passage of the law that created the Environmental Protection Agency and NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act. Okay, that's 50 years plus ago, Steve, and from that time till now, mining and our extractive industries on federal land is discouraged, and the prevailing theory is up on the Hill and in the White House, both administrations, hey, let some other country mine their products and send them to us. Why should we tear up our land? Let's keep it for future generations. Let's preserve it. But preserving something is wrong. You want to conserve, but you don't want to necessarily preserve, because that means you have no access to it and it does you no good.
So I want to be clear, because you and I are not talking about, Yosemite or Yellowstone or, next to, we're not talking about the great national parks that, are the most beautiful places on the planet. Many of these are in very isolated areas that we have obviously we have coal, we have all sorts of other precious metals that you need, by the way, right, Ned, for if you want to do the green energy stuff, if you want battery, lithium. Do we have that? Do we have cobalt?
Yeah. Again, Steve, we have everything you can imagine in abundance. When people say, oh, our country doesn't have cobalt or we don't have enough tin or tungsten, I tell them, look, you mean we don't have enough on the 19% of this country that has a geological map on it? Only 19%, Steve. 1/5 of our country has been mapped by geologists. 4/5 of our country is wildly unknown. No one knows, okay? So to say you can't go on there and map, or you can't go on the part that's been mapped and develop mines is just, it's silly. It's tanking our economy, and it's making imports from China just spike, and we're getting really hit hard now geopolitically. I mean, I'm a scientist now, but this thing is spilling over into geopolitics and politics, economics, and it's just crazy.
And Ned, I think it's spilling over to our national security, right? I mean, it's not good for our national security that we have to depend on these countries for these minerals we need even for our defense systems.
Well, it's deep into national security, and this is this topic of my new book. Basically, it's called, and it's forthcoming here probably this fall, it's called Undermining Power, how to overthrow mineral, energy, economic, and national security disinformation. We're getting hit with all kind of disinformation. Oh, minerals aren't important to our national security. Listen, without minerals, you can't make metals. Without metals, you can't have national defense. You know, if we want to put a kinetic munitions downrange, you need metals, okay? You need metals for night vision goggles. You need metals and minerals, cruise missiles, all these things. And guess what, Steve? We're importing, most of, if not all of these critical minerals, especially the rare earths, from China. So we're getting today, I did some computations before this call. We're getting 70% of our imports basically from adversaries. China, Russia.
You showed me the chart, Ned, when you and I had lunch.
Friendly. So I mean, we have some problems. And,
I know. You know, when you and I had lunch, you showed me the charts, and my jaw just dropped. Folks, we're talking about something that is stupid for our economy, stupid for our national security, stupid for our environment. By the way, let's go back to the argument that the left makes. Oh, we can't do this because it's going to just spoil the environment. We have the cleanest and the best standards, environmental standards of any country in the world, don't we?
We do. And, you know, it's so unfortunate because people, again, Steve, to say a point I mentioned a minute ago, people are making conscious efforts saying, well, let's import instead of mining instead of tearing up the United States. These are their words. It's just so silly and amateurish. Oh, instead of tearing up the United States, let's import from other countries, and that'll be how we'll handle it. But it's
well,
no good.
They're also probably using child labor and all sorts of things.
Well,
right?
that's it. That's part of the mix, child labor. But here's the thing: the other countries from whom we're importing have torn their environment up just crazy. So, in other words, you're kind of a hypocrite if you're saying let's preserve our environment. You know, let's preserve the planet, but some other country X who we're importing from has just ripped their environment up. Hey, you don't see that and you don't think about it, but it's it's total hypocrisy to not want to mine here and expect others to mine their lands and send it to us. You know, this is not good, and we look like fools on the world stage.
So I am talking to Ned Manulm, who is probably the top geologist in the country. And this is a kind of a new thing, folks, but I wanted to bring in Ned because you can tell he knows more about this than just about anybody else. And we have a policy right now that does not put America first under Joe Biden. So basically, Biden has shut down the mining industry, hasn't he?
He shut it down, and there's three things I want to mention for your audience so they understand how he shut it down.
Yes.
Number one, mining permitting, Steve, is just, I call it a labyrinth. It is impossible for these great American mining companies to do all the permits, to have everything at the state, at the local, at the federal, at the national. Yeah. It just sucks up so much of their time. The second reason and way they control is by environmental lawsuits. If once they get a permit, they just get sued, and now they can't mine. And then the third and most pernicious way is when the federal government actually withdraws federal lands from any future mining ever in perpetuity. Yes. And these people aren't dumb. They hire geologists like me, and they say, hey, listen, does this area have minerals? Yes, it does. It's very rich in minerals. Oh, okay, let's make it a national grassland. See what I mean?
I do.
They're denying the access to our minerals through permitting, lawfare, and actually withdrawal of federal land.
So do you think, Ned, we've just got a few minutes left, and this has been an incredible education you're giving to me and our audience. So do you think if Donald Trump were to get back in, that he could jumpstart this and get our mining industry back up to where it should be?
Steve, I'm confident he could, and here's two reasons why. Number one, when President Trump was in office, no matter what your politics, he put out executive order, I won't bore your audience with the number, but the executive order actually for the first time in American history defined what a critical mineral is from the White House, why it's critical, and what we're going to do about it. The second order he put out was an emergency declaration of the amount of minerals being imported from China. And those two were among the only executive orders not revoked by the Biden administration. They knew they couldn't fool with those two because they were so target. And when President Trump, should he come back in office or whatever administration, we need to stand up our U.S. Bureau of Mines That was defunded about 28 years ago, and from that time till now, our mining industry has just gone south. We need a we need mining representation at the federal level, Steve.
So when we got together and talked off the air about this, you you had done a study for us about a year or two ago at Unleashed Prosperity, and I believe you estimated that the value, I mean, you ready for this, folks? The value of these minerals that are under the ground, it's like we're sitting, like there's a massive treasure chest right below our feet, and these idiot liberals won't let us get at it. I think you said it was, the value could be $2 trillion or something, or $2 or $3 trillion.
Steve, the National Mining Association here in Washington, D.C. estimated that the minerals in the ground on federal lands is something approaching $6 trillion.
$6 trillion. $6 trillion.
Steve, I want you to buckle up now. Are you ready?
Yes.
That $6 trillion only talks about the federal lands that have been mapped. So you can pretty much say 1/5 of our minerals is worth $6 trillion. So you want to take that times 5. You're
wow.
Yeah. So it almost eclipses the national debt, the wealth that we have in this country. And again,
so this is the point, Ned, and I so appreciate you coming on, and we're coming to a hard break. But I want to first of all, folks. Ned, what's the name of the book that you've got out now? It's called Groundbreaking, is it?
Okay, Steve, 2 books from Ned Manulm on critical minerals. Real quick.
Yes.
The first one, Groundbreaking, America's Quest for Mineral Independence. It's out there
Fantastic
now on
book.
Amazon. Just Google Groundbreaking Ned Manulm. The other book coming this fall is called Undermining Power, How to Overthrow Mineral, Energy, Economic, National Security Disinformation. And it's all about critical minerals and the importation of them from China.
Folks, you've got to pay attention to this gentleman. He knows more about this. I mean, this is a story. You're not going to hear this anywhere else, but we're talking about, I don't know, I estimate 2 or 3 trillion. Ned is saying maybe it's 10 times that amount. Here's the folks, we could practically balance the budget. We could raise so much money from just mining and drilling for our resources, and Biden doesn't want to do it. I guarantee you, when Trump gets in, one of the first things I'm going to tell him is use our resources, use the money so we can retire our debt. It's a win-win-win for everybody. It creates jobs. It creates money. It helps balance the budget, and it makes us less dependent on countries that hate us. Folks, you're going to hear now from 2 of the very best in the business on finance, and I'm talking about Bob and Ryan Payne. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and we will be back same bat time, same bat channel this time next week. Have a great weekend, folks, and I'll see you soon.